Hello, everyone, and welcome to the 18th episode of the Adventures in Brain Injury podcast. My name is Kevin Ballister. I am a severe traumatic brain injury survivor and creator of AdventuresInBrainInjury.com and creator of feedabrain.com. With me is Michelle Mounberg, severe acquired brain injury survivor and co-host of the Adventures in Brain Injury podcast, which is what we're doing right now. How are you doing, Michelle?
I'm doing very well, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me on once more.
Well, of course. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope you'll be on again and again and again and again.
The adventure continues.
The adventure continues. I also want to announce and thank and I can't give enough clout to Minnesota Functional Neurology and Chiropractic, who is our sponsor now. And Jeremy Schmoe, the head physician over there, is... I've been hanging out with Jeremy for the past month, basically, as I've been traveling around since Christmas.
It's been crazy how the two of you keep almost bumping into one another. Serendipity.
Yeah, Jeremy is an excellent physician. The work he does over at Minnesota Functional Neurology and Chiropractic is bar none. I mean, I came from... Basically, I went to Colorado to spend the holidays with my family, and I ended up going to several different treatment centers, ending up at Revive treatment centers, and then Jeremy came for the Authentic Practice meeting, and I met up with Jeremy there.
Fabulous.
And then I went to the International Symposium on Clinical Neuroscience in Orlando, and guess who was there?
Oh, could it be Jeremy Schmoe? Okay.
That's right. That's right. How'd you guess?
And
then I came to Texas, back home, and on the same day that I flew in, guess who flew in?
Oh, could it be Jeremy Schmoe?
So yeah, he's been following me. I swear, stalker. But I mean, I've been immersed in functional neurology for the past about 2 months, and
yes.
the respect that people have for Jeremy and the knowledge that he has and his bedside manner, and I mean, we interviewed him in the last podcast, and what a pleasure it was to spend so much time with him over the last month. So thank you so much to Minnesota Functional Neurology and Chiropractic, and thank you, Jeremy. We got big work to do in 2017. Here we go.
It's looking good already.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. All right, so who do we have on the show with us today?
Oh, we've got another gem in the functional neurology family. We're just so blessed to have these passionate, dedicated practitioners willing to share their time, their expertise, and guide our listeners and us on the path of our healing adventure. And so today's guest is Dr. Jerome Lubbe. Dr. Jerome Lubbe from Thrive Neuro-Health, thriveneuro.com. This gentleman has completed more than 1,000 hours of postgraduate continuing education in one of our favorite AIBI specialties, functional neurology. He has chosen to concentrate on childhood developmental disorders, vestibular rehabilitation, movement disorders, neurochemistry, concussion, and brain injury rehabilitation. Most important to me, he has the patient experience. Dr. Lubbe has been a migraine sufferer for over 15 years, and living with this debilitating pain shaped his passion to understand and assist patients. First came his degree in chiropractic, specializing in neurology, then the founding of his private practice, Thrive Neuro-Health, which is located in Decatur, Georgia. His website, I loved it. It's so easy to navigate as a brain injury patient. It is one page. We were struck by the words he chose to describe his work: to equip, empower, and encourage colleagues, entrepreneurs, and students to serve their patients, local communities, and their staff through continued training in the practical applications of functional neurology. And this is exactly what we are aiming to do today on the AIBI podcast. Welcome, Dr. Jerome Lubbe.
Thanks so much for having me, guys. I appreciate it. It's really enjoyable to hear somebody say that something like a one-page website is exciting.
Oh my gosh.
It's pretty hard to drill down sometimes and distill. So I'm thrilled and thank you for the honor and the opportunity to join you guys today.
Is there anything, a personal touch you would like to add to our bio intro for you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, probably the biggest thing is everybody that knows me knows that I'm passionate about my work and serving. But the thing that's first and foremost is my wife and my son. I've been married for almost 12 years. I have a 16-month-old son who I think is as strong as a full-grown adult.
Oh my!
He's brilliant. My wife's name is Deborah and my son's name is Bennett. And the only reason that I'm able to have this conversation and I've been able to be successful is her support. And he's just a joy to have around. He's amazing.
Well, if we could take a moment to thank you and Deborah and Bennett, because I'm realizing in this functional neurology family, there really is so much more beyond the name on the nameplate on the front door of the clinic, because it is so encompassing and it's such a dedicated specialty that we know there's a family behind that doctor's name.
It's a beautiful thing, and there's so much in the background that happens after you close the door to the clinic and before you open it back up in the morning. So
yes.
I'm incredibly fortunate to have great support staff.
Yes. Could we stay on that personal note right now, Kevin? I have to know a little bit more about this surname, Lubbe, and Dr. Lubbe's birth in the heart of Africa. Could we hear a little bit more about your story?
Yeah, I'd be happy to share. My parents are from Zimbabwe when it was called Rhodesia. I was born in South Africa in a place called Benoni, which Benoni is so rural and so remote that you get one of two answers when somebody from South Africa who knows where Benoni is hears you're from there. They either go, "Oh, shame," or they go, "And you made it out." So the only claim to fame is that Charlize Theron is from Benoni, so she's far more attractive than me, I promise. But we immigrated from South Africa to the Congo and Zaire when I was 3. We lived in the Congo for a few years, and then we actually fled the Congo through a story that's a little too long for this podcast, but let's just say we landed in the States in Knoxville, Tennessee, in 1990 with $100, 2 suitcases, a parrot, and a bipolar grandmother. So it was interesting. We came on refugee asylum status, and it was a very wild cultural shock, to say the least.
I feel like I just watched the trailer to a movie.
Yes, exactly.
We came to the States with $100, 2 suitcases, and a bipolar grandmother.
You can't forget the parrot though. The parrot.
I forgot that. Yeah, the parrot is is huge in there. How did I forget the parrot? As much as I want to talk about parrots, let's steer further into functional neuro. And what brought you into the profession?
It's a great question, Kevin. I've actually been a patient for more than half my life. I started having migraines that were pretty severe when I was 17, and over the course of 9 years, I went to 21 different specialists in 4 different states to try and get a diagnosis. I was actually diagnosed by a relative-in-law. My older brother's wife had an uncle who was a neurosurgeon who was trained at Vanderbilt, and he actually diagnosed me when I was 24. And it turns out that I was diagnosed with a Chiari malformation, which took a little while to even figure out how to say, never mind understand what it was.
Right.
Sure,
Yeah, I was gonna ask. So what is that malformation?
Yeah, so it's the way I always explain it is you've got if your forearm was a banana and your fist was a grapefruit and you tucked a little cutie orange right against the part of the front part of your wrist, that's your cerebellum of the hand.
Cerebellum. Yeah.
Yeah.
Perfect. Yeah.
So the cerebellum has these tonsils, tails, kind of like the tonsils in the back of your throat. They're supposed to stay tucked up inside against the cerebellum and in the back part of your brain. And the long story short is they herniated down or dropped down, and
Oh.
they made a permanent move in real estate. Apparently, they didn't like the area of town they were in.
Ah.
They made a permanent move, and they take up this area in the back of the skull that's really designed to have some open breathing room for a lot of important things like CSF.
Brainstem.
Oh gosh, yes.
You don't
Right
want
there as well.
you don't necessarily want to cork an area that doesn't need to be corked. So,
No.
to kind of a couple bullet points, I over the last 17 years have averaged one migraine every 3 days. And recovery. Last year I had 140.
Oh.
And those are separate, individual triggered, and I only qualify it as a migraine if it starts with a prodrome or an aura.
So what's a prodrome and aura?
Yeah, so it's kind of like if you were sitting somewhere and all of a sudden it looked like your vision started to fill up with water, kind of like if you've ever worn swim goggles and you got a little water inside the goggle, and how you kind of are looking through the water halfway but not half of it being filled.
Yes.
It's kind of like that. So you have this part of your vision for me that it looks like water reflecting off of a pool, and it actually fills and looks like my eyes and my vision fill with water. And it'll start really small, like I'll be reading something and then you'll start to lose some of the letters and it looks like somebody's just kind of erased that part of your vision. It's kind of like a blind spot. And then it'll start to expand and it'll become very dynamic. It looks like shattered glass or water reflecting off of a pool. And by the time over 40 to 45 minutes that's built up and it's gotten to a point where it's crescendoed, I've got about 60 to 70% of my vision that's completely blurred. And
Oh, good heavens.
over that period of time, it'll end up becoming, you'll have all of those sensory pieces kick in, from increased sensitivity to touch, to taste, to nausea, to movement, light and sound, and then of course the big one, which is pain. And I went to 21 specialists over that 9 years, finally got the diagnosis, but then over the next 3 years or so, actually went to providers with a name, and most of them had never heard of it. So to answer your original question, the reason that I got into it is I found myself having spent an exorbitant amount of time, money, and resources, as well as emotion and relationship, in trying to get an answer and still not having one, that I ended up moving into trying to find some alternative resources, because the surgery that's recommended for a Chiari, a decompression surgery, is pretty heavy duty. You're changing a lot of real estate, and I already have a fairly large head, so I'm like, really not. I'm not a doctor,
and it's in a very sensitive area of the brain as well. I mean, the brain is a sensitive organ in general, but we're looking at right by the cerebellum, by the brainstem, and the brainstem is what affects everything in your body, right?
It is.
So,
you're doing brain and spine surgery at the same time to do decompression. So I just didn't feel led to do the surgery, and unfortunately my tolerance for medication was so high that in 14 years of trying, nothing ever even took the edge off, except for one trip to the hospital where they thought I was having a stroke. And I had expressive aphasia, which means you can't generate any words for about 5 hours. They actually were doing a stroke protocol with me. Long story short, they ended up giving me Dilaudid and a couple of other things. But in 17 years, I've had one experience in 17 years where a pain medication has made an impact.
And Dilaudid is an anti-seizure medication.
Right. So very heavy duty. So, it's great when I want to go out and have a drink with friends. I can have a lot more than them and not get put under the table. But when you're having a migraine and you want to be able to get rid of the pain, metabolizing things quickly is not so great. So I ended up moving into drugs and surgery, not for any philosophical perspective, but just for the pursuit, wasn't on the table for me. So I started pursuing a lot of alternative providers and found out that most of them had never heard about what I had or knew what to do with it. So I said to myself, okay, I'm in this purgatory of sorts between a traditional community that's so good at triage and damage control, but doesn't really do recuperative long-term rehab with the mindset of actually resolving the issue overall. And then this alternative community that was so gifted at rehab and proactive care and health and wellness, but most of them had no idea how to really work with a complex case in a fragile state or in a way that was really taking into consideration that maybe my approach and my standard protocol doesn't fit for this person. Unfortunately, I was put in the hospital several times by alternative providers who had very benign processes and interventions that they thought were fine, and it turns out that for me they weren't.
Benign processes meaning safe.
Safe, yeah, meaning that they had an idea, that you can just do this intervention and it won't be that consequential. And it turns out that you can't necessarily assume that everything for everybody is going to work. So,
well said.
Yeah. First, I want to thank you for expressing the benefits and the shortcomings of each style of care, alternative or traditional. Where we need to make the decision based on risk versus possible benefits, risks and unknowns. There's a lot that we don't know, and that's a risk as well, right?
Absolutely.
We don't know what the deal is. So yeah, I appreciate that perspective. And being a patient, you really get that. You really understand that, yeah, this is my life we're talking about. This is a big deal,
Yeah, that's absolutely the case, Kevin. And there's actually, through my experience, I've kind of come to terms with it. For anybody who's listening, and I've had so many experiences being on the exam table. I've been on the exam table far more times than I've been in front of it. Let's just put it that way. But I think that there's 4 really easy questions that everybody can go into a conversation with a provider, and the provider can have these too.
Oh, let's hear them.
It really allows you to partner with each other, but also it gives the person who's going in as the patient so much authority and also so much ability to drive some of the conversation, so they don't feel so a lot of times we feel as patients like we're inconveniencing the person that's supposed to have our solutions and our hope at hand. But the 4 questions are: how did we get here? Meaning, if you or your provider don't have a really comprehensive understanding of where you're at in the moment of that conversation, everything after that is going to be a guess. And you don't want to make guesses when you're trying to get clarity on where you're going next. So how did we get here is a big question. And one of the things that's important is to take time, right? So for instance, my intake exam, which not a lot of folks are comfortable with doing, my intake exam is 2 hours. Because I want to finish the conversation and ask the person sitting with me, do you have any other questions? And they say no. Because how many times have we finished an exam with a provider that lasted 4 minutes, and 2 of those minutes was him figuring out what prescription to give you? Or it was with somebody who, even as an alternative provider, is trying to stage the next 11 patients in his queue or her queue. So, having time to assess how you got here for both the patient and the provider is important. The second one is, where are we going? Meaning, do we have a really intentional game plan? And have we got a forecast about how we're going to set goals, what the expectations are, what's realistic, what's clarity in terms of how to even achieve that, and what's realistic in terms of where your current situation and case is? Is what you're projecting as a provider plausible? Is what you're projecting as a patient realistic? So those are important. The third one is, how do we course correct? Because the likelihood, and anybody who has ever had a relationship that lasted longer than a week with anyone knows that sometimes it doesn't go the way you expected, right? Having that understanding in your relationship with your provider and with your own journey as a patient, it's important to know that it's probably a guarantee that things are going to change compared to what you expected. So be prepared to course correct and be aware of when that's necessary so that when you adjust quickly, you're not recovering from another accident. You're just avoiding one or adjusting based on the circumstances.
Brilliant.
And then the last one, which is very rare, I never had this conversation as a patient, but as a provider, I have it with every patient that I see. And the last one is, what's our exit strategy? Realistically, if you get to a point that, let's say that we had a really good idea of how we got here, we have a really good idea of where we're going, and we have made a ton of course corrections, we've been really, really anticipatory, and we've been aware of what's needed to move forward in really intentional ways, but we're just not seeing the changes that we hoped for, then what does it look like to refer? What does it look like to co-manage? What does it look like to say, you know what, maybe I'm not the right fit for you and maybe you're not the right fit for me, and that's okay. Having an exit strategy and being intentional about knowing when's the right time to move on, I think is healthy in terms of not having those expectations unmet. And we know from a lot of stuff that we can't go into on this call, but the mindset and the paradigm of both the provider and the patient with regards to hope and with regards to healthy psychology massively affects your neurochemistry. And your neuropsychology is so important that, you know, if I can give you one more quick bullet point, it's how did we get here? Where are we going? What's our course correction? And what's our exit strategy? The other thing that I tell patients is there's 4 things to determine success, which is I have to be right in my diagnosis. I have to be right in my intervention. You have to be capable of change. And then the 4th one, which is what I'm referring to, is you have to believe it's even remotely possible, because that notion is so powerful. So, but if you have that conversation about, you know, what does it look like to figure out where we're going, make changes, and then exit if needed, that increases the confidence for both the patient and the provider so much that it impacts that component of believability and change. And I think that piece is one of those intangibles that a lot of providers and a lot of patients don't really weigh heavily enough.
Wow, that is beautiful what you just laid out there. That's like relationship in any instance, you know. How do we get here? Where are we going? How do we course correct? Because nothing's going to be just a straight line, right? We need to adapt, baby. Be able to adapt.
And I really like that it's so collaborative, Dr. Lubbe, because when you talk about the fact that you need to have this information to make a correct diagnosis, you need to have this information to develop your interventions, you need your patient to be willing to participate and change if need be, and both patient and physician, doctor, practitioner need to have a belief that there is hope, that there is possibility in one's future. I am so uplifted by these last few minutes. Thank you for this gift. And tell me that you're either cloning yourself presently or you are teaching.
You know, the funny thing is, God has a sense of humor. I have an identical twin, but he is he's not in this field at all. Actually, I'm working on at the moment, Michelle, I'm working on a lot of practical resources as a patient doctor, which is a double entendre, you know.
Yes.
As a patient doctor, there's so many resources that exist, but there are still so many that are left to be made. So I am working on creating quite a bit of content for specifically the goal of practical application in each individual's life, because you know, I mean, the encounters that we each have with our patients and our providers are so limited that if we don't generate an idea of autonomy and independence and ownership for our own recovery and healthcare journeys, it's going to be tough to really get long-term effective change. So it's, you know, you mentioned the hope, but I think sometimes one of the biggest things, and I can say this for sure from my own journey, is sometimes it isn't always about the resolution. It's about the clarity. Because it's so exhausting to feel like you're running around chasing your own tail, that if somebody told me, look, you're going to have migraines, but this is a way that you can manage them so much more significantly, stop chasing down resolving the migraines and being disenfranchised and disheartened when it doesn't happen, So I think a lot of the resources that I'm working on are designed to help somebody with clarity and resource for situations and where they feel like they're completely lost and in the dark. So there's a lot coming, but cloning myself, I'm still working on convincing my twin brother, but I think it's a long shot.
Wow. So your twin brother, does he have a Chiari malformation?
The interesting thing is, Kevin, I don't know. He's been symptom free. He's never had an issue. He's had 2 migraines in his life. Both of them I was with him. I was able to do some interventions and we knocked them out in less than 30 minutes. I love that because I was able to do it, and also envied him deeply and slightly resented the fact that it was so easy to fix. But thrilled that I could help. But he's actually, a lot of people have said, why hasn't he gotten checked? And I've always communicated, look, he's asymptomatic. And once you get a diagnosis, getting rid of that diagnosis and that identity is like asking somebody to change their name.
Yes.
He doesn't have any problems. He doesn't need to be given a diagnosis that's asymptomatic or non-problematic. It's just not necessary. So I don't know if he does. It'd be interesting to find out one day, but right now we don't know.
I think that, you actually, Dr. Lubbe, you really hit the nail on the head. You've spent time, energy, resources, but you also spent emotion and relationships on this journey to find a resolution, a cure. And I think you hit upon a really critical piece to the journey that all of us are on in one way or another. It's finding peace.
Absolutely.
Peace within and the situation that we might have may change. I mean, Kevin and I joke about our adventures. I don't like being called a patient. It is a label that I'm trying to dump. I don't want that to be my middle name or my first name. I'm only a patient when I get to see that doctor for 4 minutes. The rest of the time, I'm me.
Yeah.
Right.
And when I was in the depth of my recovery from a brain tumor resection and then adult onset pandas, I just renamed my office the Home School of Medicine. It was my life. And once, of course, the acute symptoms were under control, then I had to go about rebuilding or just visualizing, period. What do I want my life to be? Because this is not it. And how much in your work, in your resources, do you emphasize being heard or hearing, as the practitioner, hearing that patient, listening to, being present with? Because you're also involved in creating an authentic practice, aren't you?
I am, and it's a great question, Michelle. I think, and this is, one of those moments of serendipity you have when you wake up and you look back over 10 years of pain and suffering and you go, wow, my perspective. Thank God I have this perspective, because there is just so much to understand that you can't understand without experience.
Yes.
So in that regard, with the being heard part, I can remember, if I can you humor me for a quick story?
Please.
Okay. So there was a very specific experience that I had that I, as a patient, said, if I ever get into the situation that this circumstance is reversed, I will never, or I'll attempt to never have a patient or a friend who I'm trying to listen to feel the way I feel right now. I had, this was before I got my diagnosis, and I had gotten into, and I won't say what city and what hospital so nobody can Google it, but I got into a meeting with one of the top neurologists in the country. And I had waited 4 months for this meeting. Came in, he did what I now know as 4 very, very basic neurological evaluation tools, just a little quick 2-minute exam, asked me 3 questions, and pulled out his prescription pad for an MRI and 2 drugs. And the experience lasted about 5 minutes. And he asked me I said, as he was leaving, he said, he said, do you know what's next? And I said, can I ask you a question? And he said, I've got time for one question. I said, fair enough. I said, under what circumstance do you think that in the last 5 minutes you understand my journey as a patient? In my opinion, there's one of two situations. Either you're Jesus or you're ignorant. I said, I'd like to know which one it is, because if your ego is so bold as to think that you understand what I've experienced over the last 14 years in less than 5 minutes, it's got to be one of those two. He just looked at me. And I said, look, here's the thing. I know you don't have time, and I know you probably don't have the answers. So you go ahead and just throw that in the trash can. I appreciate the time, and you just move on to your next patient. Because I realized at that point, it wasn't necessarily that his heart was in the wrong place. It's that he was in a space that didn't afford him to even have 10 minutes with me. He was in such demand, and the system that they had in place was so tight that he could not spend 10 minutes with me. So I told myself, if I get into a situation where I can have the situation reversed, I'll never do that. So to answer your question, I always start my conversation out with a new patient telling them that I work for them. I said, look, I know
That's beautiful.
I know you've had different experiences in the past, but I want to set a couple of ground rules before we even start the conversation. And here's my ground rules. One, I work for you, period. You're not an inconvenience to me. You're not wasting my time. If we don't have enough time and you get to the end of this conversation and you feel like there's still things that need to be unpacked, we'll schedule more time. We'll make it work. But I'm not going to start with you until I feel like we are both on the same page with how you got here and where we're going. So the hard part, unfortunately, due to some less than stellar experiences on my part, it's actually in the first 5 minutes of a first meeting with somebody, either on the phone or in person, I communicate to them that my time is not limited, but maybe my knowledge and my resources are, but it's certainly not my time or my interest level in making sure that they're heard.
Oh, wow. Oh, my gosh. I'm so glad that we are on audio right now, not video, because I'm welling up. I think most of us, Kevin, yourself, many others, when we go on these complex, what did you call it, Kevin? Medical purgatory? When we're floundering in medical purgatory and
that was actually Jerome's.
Oh, was
Jerome's
it?
description, yeah.
My ego's not so fragile that you can't take it, Kevin. Because nobody's going to name anything after my last name. It would be the Lubbe technique, right?
Yeah, right. It would be lube, right?
Yeah.
But you get that. So, yeah, I'm just absolutely beautiful how you're taking this patient perspective. And I so appreciate that. I was also thinking about how what you were talking about before with helping people in the acceptance piece. You know, I acceptance is not giving up and being like, whatever, it's just going to be this way. Acceptance is being okay with this moment. Even if you're not okay with this moment, being like, I'm going to be okay in this moment, you know?
Yes.
And then working towards whatever is going to improve the situation. You also brought up, you know, we need to be sure that we agree that getting better is a real possibility. Mm-hmm. And we believe in what we're doing. Because without belief that it is achievable, it's not, you know, to say, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're probably right either way.
Yes.
Yeah, it's true. And you know, the interesting thing is that there's a difference between being naive and being unrealistically optimistic, and also being pragmatic and intentional about what you do. That's why the slogan underneath my logo is optimal function for life.
Yes.
It doesn't necessarily mean recovery. It doesn't necessarily mean the word healing. It doesn't necessarily mean the word fixed or recovered past tense. But what does optimal function look like? I know there's not a single person who's on the planet who is above ground that you cannot find some way to optimize them. The degree and the percentage will vary, but you're looking at, even if somebody is on life support and you're helping them through the transition of the last 24 hours of their life, you're trying to optimize that last 24 hours. That's the goal, right? To give you a perspective, I came to terms. I had some really, really incredibly tough times over the last 15 years, as most chronic patients do. I was suicidal twice. I tried once. I realized after I came out of that space in that space of depression and in that space of struggle that, if I'm always going to be hurting, I'd rather be hurting and happy than hurting and angry, because either way I'm hurting. And that mindset change and that perspective change, it didn't change my circumstances, and it didn't change the nature of how frequently or how severe I was having my migraines, but it did actually change my recovery time. It changed how quickly I could get through and get over, because, again, learning more about the nature of neurochemistry and the things that change, we've all experienced things where we've been in the middle of an argument with somebody and somebody does something hysterical and we start laughing.
Yes.
And at that point, the argument is over, right? You can't bring it back because it's too funny. So in that situation, all of us have experienced this massive change in neurochemistry and this massive change in perspective and attitude instantly. The circumstances haven't changed, and you may not have even found a solution yet, but the fact that you just feel a little bit, like you mentioned, Michelle, a little sense of peace and a little sense of calm, I think probably the biggest thing that I'm working with in myself and in my patients is to try and have a little bit of that mindset change without necessarily moving too far into unrealistic territory that ends up long-term disheartening you and creates kind of a loss of hope. But again, just one more comment. For me to be able to do this, and I think this is some of the challenge that I would give to providers and also to patients and people listening, the foresight that it's taken to get into a place to be able to utilize what I've just communicated over the last 30 minutes was a 4-year intentional process. I didn't decide to open a practice and figure out how I was going to be able to spend 2 hours doing an exam with somebody. I had to figure out how I could charge a reasonable rate where 2 hours with somebody wouldn't break their bank, and be able to figure out how to live a lifestyle and have so little debt that I wasn't scared to death of how many patients were coming in the door, so that every time that I'm having a conversation with somebody, I can't be present with them because I'm realizing I don't have enough patients coming in to cover my overhead. For me, it was a 4-year process to get to the point where I could open a practice and deliver anything remotely close, because I'm still doing the course corrections all the time. I just decided where I wanted to go, and now I'm in the process of doing my best not to have to make an exit strategy.
Dr. Lubbe, I could tell whether or not my next visit, my pending visit with a practitioner was going to be even remotely helpful by whether or not I either tripped on the ego or the carpet walking into the clinic.
Tripped on the ego?
Well, there are some practitioner egos that are so large, one can
trip on them when you're walking in the door.
Yeah.
You're ego tripping, huh?
The worst carpet on the planet. Nobody consults any of these people at hotels or doctors' offices about patients with vestibular. Seriously, it drives me insane. So yes,
right. Actually, yeah. Can we talk about that super quick? So the patterns on the floors that are on the walls. Yeah. If they're really complex patterns, they can really challenge the vestibular system of patients and brain injury survivors, and really make people sick, depending on their tolerance. Yeah. So yeah, what's up with that? Just these gaudy.
Yeah, I can't speak to the aesthetic decision, other than a lot of providers are older than me and they maybe still hung on to an 80s kind of pattern that they felt would be great when they finally opened their practice, and it took them 25 years. I don't know. To actually drill down from a clinical standpoint what you're talking about, Kevin, an example that I could give you is if you've ever met anybody that has a fear of heights, you've got a great real-time example of how powerful the body is from a subconscious and kind of just a knee-jerk response. I mean, you take somebody who's got a fear of heights and you put them into a situation where they feel uncomfortable or they even perceive that they're uncomfortable, they're going to get anxious. They're going to have a change in their heart rate, their blood pressure, their perspiration. They're going to have changes in their nausea. They're going to get anxious. They're going to start to hyperventilate because that fight or flight system that's designed to keep you safe is powerful, right?
Yes.
Well, the thing is, your balance system, which is what you called your vestibular system, as well as your coordination, which is your ability to actually move, which is through your cerebellum, and then your visual system through your eyes, those three things, balance, vision, and coordination, are part of the vestibular system. And man, their whole job is to be able to keep you upright, help you move, control falling, which is all walking is. It's a controlled series of falls, and then be able to keep your eyes fixed on a target. Well, if you have any kind of complications with your vision, your balance, or your coordination, especially post-head injury, and you can have this stuff happen from, I mean, look at what happens if you have too much to drink. Look how hard it is to keep the room from spinning, right? So you can be affected by nutrition. You can be affected by brain injury. You can be affected even by cognition. Think about the studies that have been done by how much worse it is to try and function being tired than it is to try and function being drunk. So all of us have these experiences, but at the end of the day, when you're looking at a pattern and your brain's job is to try and fix on a target so that it knows whether or not to engage it as food, engage it as a mate, or run away from it so it doesn't eat you, and it can't lock on a target, it's going to fight nonstop to try and do that. And if you don't have those systems really nice and tuned and calibrated, and you're running around trying to figure out why somebody put paisley on the floor, it's super, super hard to get that system in check. And just like somebody who's got a fear of heights, sometimes it doesn't matter how much you want it to go away. It's just happening to you, you know?
It's so true. So, and I've had, let me interject with my personal discovery, my trigger. I have found that even when I'm wearing amber glasses, I have some very ugly amber safety glasses, which I wear.
But you rock them.
Oh, yes, say it again. Try and explain that to anybody outside of our neuro community. It's, I love the children, actually. They're great. They just stand there and look, why are you wearing those?
Yeah. Pretty good.
Course,
you know what? Well, be like a space invader or something. Like, come up with a good story.
Exactly. I need my elevator speech for certain.
There you go.
And here's the thing. I would push myself. Oh, I'm just going to get this done. Oh, I'm just going to wrap this up. And I've realized now that if I am staring at a computer screen, and perhaps Dr. Lubbe has some insight on what the trigger on the screen is, but if I'm staring at a computer screen after 4 o'clock in the afternoon, even for a few seconds, it will disable my ability to calm my brain and induce sleep. I know that for that night, I've lost it. And so I have just had to accept the fact that, okay, my brain does not care for whatever is projected at the eyes after 4 o'clock. It cannot process it. I've got the Flux screen
app. Yeah, it's a great app.
That app, and I've got the amber glasses on. I've got bright sunlight. I've got a big window in my office. I have to realize that my work day, it ends at 4 o'clock. I just cannot do anything more. And so that's part of the acceptance. I kept thinking, well, I can push myself, but it's a trigger. It's real. And so my day in front of any screen ends at 4 p.m.
Yeah. And I think you're making such a powerful point, Michelle, which the biggest thing in all of that is you're aware, right? If you don't understand and you haven't connected the dots or had somebody connect the dots for you that what you're doing is unintentionally creating your symptoms, then it's hard to resolve them. But once you know and you are still intentional about engaging in something that you know is troublesome, then you have to have a different conversation about the why you're doing that, because now you're valuing whatever it is that you're engaging in above and beyond the likelihood of decreasing your symptoms and improving the quality of life. So you're essentially saying what I'm working on is more important than my quality of life. And that's a different conversation, right?
That is, that's a huge conversation, and I know, I've done a fair bit of reading and conversation, and for some reason it has a female tendency, or it is a female tendency to put the self last, and I'll take care of everybody else. I will get the ski lessons organized and all the financial calculations done of who owes what, and get all the scheduling done. And then I will lose a night of sleep over it. And, why? I have had to say, I'm worth more than this. I am worth a good night of sleep. I am worth a peaceful, it's really changed my entire, I won't say my entire lifestyle. It's changed a very large piece of what I consider my lifestyle. And for someone as empathetic and compassionate and grounded as you, to be able to have given me that knowledge 5 years ago, I just think of where I could be on my recovery. Which go ahead, please.
No, I appreciate it, Michelle. And I think, if you have both had such exposure to functional neurology, so you'll understand some of this. But for your listeners, the simple thing about the way the brain works is, at the end of the day, all it's trying to do is survive. And it's surviving based on what it thinks is safe and unsafe. Now, the challenge is that it doesn't know the difference between perspective and reality. If you think you're in danger, i.e. fear of heights, and you're not, then it will start to respond as if it's in danger. And the reason I mention that to what you communicated is our thought process is so powerful in terms of the brain's response to whether or not it's in danger, that if it thinks it's in danger, it cannot tell the difference between a bear and a deadline. So if you're going to miss a flight and you're running late to something, your body's going to respond in the same way as if you are actually having a gun held to your head. It's going to physiologically change. And the trouble is, to point to your screens, one of the things that I communicate with folks, every single person I meet with, because it's across the board, everybody's got a fight or flight system. It's called your midbrain or your mesencephalon. And everybody's got this area of the brain that's designed to assume that it needs to hulk out to keep you alive, and that you need it to work strongly to keep you on the planet for tomorrow. And you can make better decisions once you're safe, right? But screens, unfortunately, the part of your brain that deals with vertical eye movements, which all of us are doing when we're scrolling through Facebook at 11:45 at night because we just don't want to send the last email. The problem is that part of the brain deals with not only vertical eye movements, but it deals with bright lights, and it deals with convergence, or what means for your eyes to cross or something to come close to your face. Because if something comes close to your face, this part of the brain goes, you need to withdraw or you need to step back. That's dangerous. Yep. We're taking these screens that are bright, we're putting them close to our face, and we're scrolling up. And all three of those things are like pouring gasoline on the Hulk, because the part of the brain that does those activities is exactly where your fight or flight system lives. So when you're at night on your phone or in the dark, the other thing is your brain can't tell the difference between daylight and screen light. It will start to ramp up because it thinks that the sun is coming up, and it starts changing cortisol releases. It starts changing all of your circadian rhythms. And now not only are you scared and anxious, but your body's releasing more cortisols to keep you awake, and you can't sleep. And the whole thing that you were trying to do by decompressing on Facebook because you've had a hard day is what's keeping you from going to sleep and making the next day harder. So my recommendation is just say no to the phone. Light and movement are powerful. I mean, you want to talk about from a withdrawal standpoint, looking at an analog piece of paper like a paper book compared
Yes.
to looking at a screen that has light, that has a change in texture and depth, and then you add motion in, you're talking about the difference between paying $1 for something and paying $1,000 for something in the same period of time. You're going
Wow.
to utilize way more resources, and you've got a limited amount of resources. Everybody has what's called metabolic capacity, which is what Kevin talks about with Feed Your Brain and those nutritional components like you guys are working on educating folks with. If you don't have fuel in the tank, looking at a screen, even if it's in your peripheral vision, is like slamming the gas pedal, redlining the car, and dumping the fuel out that you have. So it could be light, it could be motion and movement, and then it could also be even the simple process of there's such a difference in depth perception with a digital component versus an analog or a paper that trying to do what's called fovealization, which is basically if you've ever had an experience where you let your eyes blur out and then you focus them in, you let them blur out and you let them focus in just like a camera, that effort of trying to focus and put that target on your fovea is a lot of work. It's brain power. So if you're
Oh,
doing that
tell me about it.
and you don't
I
have enough gas in the tank, you're gonna wear out. There is no better medicine on the planet than a good night's sleep. So if you can get really good quality sleep, whatever is interfering with that, I mean, you should be as vigilant with that as if it was something that was attacking your family or your friends, because it is going to degenerate your brain if you don't sleep well. It's just the way it is. There's so much evidence around Alzheimer's and other neurodegenerative disorders that are tied to constant fluctuations in adrenaline and constant fluctuations in poor sleep patterns. So I can tell you for sure that if anybody can be vigilant about decreasing their screen time, and look, I mean, realistically, we're going to have exposure to them. You can't live in a bubble. But for example, one of the things that I would recommend is utilizing an app called Headspace. You know, you've got an app, you're going to use the phone, but this app is going to walk you through a 10-minute relaxation and mindfulness technique with breathing that you can calm down and disconnect and give your brain a breather for 10 minutes in the middle of the day. So there are ways to still utilize technology for our benefit, but it's obviously dealing with the nature of addiction and reliance, and those are bigger conversations for other podcasts.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's another app that I use on my computer called Timeout,
Mm-hmm.
and you can set it to whatever time interval, but it'll let you know, like, all right, take a little break. And I actually was using it for my vision therapy, and actually I think I set it to like 20 minutes at one point. Every 20 minutes I get up, do a quick eye exercise, and it would keep my eyes, from constantly converging, right? Or looking at things up close. And what you're saying is that we have the convergence actually triggers our fight or flight, because if things are coming at you, you're a little, that's something that you want to look out for.
I want to dive into how on earth you can focus amid the pain and distraction with a family. I mean, how do you do that?
Oh gosh, it's such a tough question to answer simply.
Can I jump in and say that I can hear the passion that comes from your experience and from what you're doing? There is so much passion behind it.
Oh yeah.
And that's definitely a huge motivator for me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it, Kevin, and that's the thing. I mean, for me, the simple answer, Michelle, is obviously my ethos is my faith, and I think I've had a significant amount of grace, and there's been plenty of times that it shouldn't have worked, and it has, and there hasn't been really good explanations for that, other than I think some serendipity and some providence. Obviously, an incredible spouse, an incredible family. I've only had a few people. We started with 6, we lost 2. So we keep the ones that we have pretty close. But I think Kevin actually hit it on the head. The biggest thing for me is I know what is possible when I show up, if I just show up. I don't know what's possible if I don't. And the other thing is there's a lot riding on it, right? I mean, when I'm sitting in a situation that I have a stroke patient in front of me that, I'll be totally honest, feels completely above my clinical pay grade, sitting there telling me I can't find or feel where my left arm and leg is, but I know my left arm has got a 10 out of 10 pain, and I would like for you to see what's possible. And after 6 weeks of working with them, their pain is down to a 3 out of 10, and they're able to use a walker where they had a massive amount of real estate in their brain damaged because of a hemorrhagic stroke. These things shouldn't be possible, but we're seeing them happen. And I think the fact that I get to experience what's normally defined as a miracle, but what one of my mentors, Dr. Carrick, said that I so appreciate is it's not a miracle, it's a clinical expectation. If you with the understanding of how you got there, where you're going, and how you course correct, sometimes you get a little bit more surprised by what happens than you expected. But, obviously you're working towards a goal. But the thing that allowed me to get up, I think if I'm honest, Michelle, there were plenty, if not most nights that I gave up. I just kind of got over it in the morning.
That good night of sleep served you well.
Yeah, huge. Because I think also for me, my dad passed away when I was a freshman in high school. He worked himself to death to get green cards for us. It took us almost 8 years to do it legally, and it was brutal. And he passed away 6 months afterwards. And he was 43. And it's one of those things where I look at the situation and go, it's completely rational and it's completely understandable to be fatigued and to be out of energy and to say, I can't do this today. But if there's any capacity to try and push through and make it happen, I know that the outcome is going to be worth it. I think on the other side of that, I've had to have a very healthy and sobering conversation about doing too much and trying to achieve too much too fast and burning the candle at both ends and in the middle, and knowing there are some things like the Chiari that I don't have the ability to just wish away or change, but I can certainly decide not to overcommit, and realistically the nature of the change in the quantity and quality and frequency of the migraines from last year to this year is evidence of that.
Yeah, it's something I talk about is that motivation is huge, and having the drive, the passion, that all plays into our motivation. But let's be real, we're not always motivated.
No.
Sometimes we wake up and we don't feel like doing whatever we're like about to do, right? You wake up and you don't really feel like going to work. What do? You get dressed and you go to work.
Yeah.
And that's the will. And the will is super important. And to just know, and I think a huge piece of that is having the visualization that it is possible, believing that it is possible for better days ahead, Then you get up, you do it, and the motivation comes right back.
This is one of the things that I am very honest, and I think probably one of the reasons that I have a different rapport with my patients and others is I'm honest with my patients that I'm still a patient. I don't try to create some sort of facade that I've got everything together, because I think it's very, very easy to paint a picture that your highlight reel is just what everybody sees on Facebook and what everybody sees when you're in the office, but then you crash when you get home. And one of the things that I share with my patients is I haven't come to some mystical space where I have no anxiety and no fear about my migraines. I've lived with 115 to 120 on average every year for the last 17. So the nature of what I experience is it is probably a 90% likelihood that I'm going to either wake up or have a moment during the day where I'm going to have anxiety. And we're not talking like the passive, I think I forgot my lunch at home. I have to go through every single day this reframing of my mindset around if I think I'm about to start having a migraine. It's exhausting, right? So yes. One of the things that I do, and I teach this with the folks that I meet with, it's a little different than your traditional neurology practice or chiropractic, is the neuropsychology piece of reframing. Because one of the things that we know around the way that the brain works from a neuropsychology standpoint is it needs confirmation from you. Whatever you tell it, it will believe to a degree. It's kind of like an amplifier for a guitar. If you put in a really bad signal, it's going to put out an even worse signal. If you put in a really good signal, it's going to amplify it and make it even better. Now, that's an oversimplification, but one of the things that I do is just to clearly state what I'm anxious about. And I tell my patients this: if they come in and you can tell they're on edge, I say, look, just be honest, state what you're anxious about. What are you afraid of right now? And then we go through a breathing technique where I just tell them just to be totally transparent about what they're frustrated. It's not about fixing it. It's not about finding a solution. It's just about clarifying what it is that's creating the space. What is your bear? What is creating that anxiety? And then what you do is you just state something that's true. It may not change the fear, but what's something that's true? Like, for instance, I'm afraid I'm going to have a migraine, and that makes me anxious. Okay, let's do some breathing and let's work through it. Take a second, which we know from breathing techniques through science is powerful for increasing cognition and capacity and ability to reframe your perspective around what is or isn't happening. But then I'll say, you know what, I'm not actually having a migraine right now, and if I do, I know how to handle it. So I speak a truth about what I can do that kind of decreases and diminishes the severity of the anxiety, and it may not fix the problem, but because you've given your brain something to focus on and you've minimized the size and the intensity of the potential bear attack, so to speak, it starts to change your neurochemistry, and it plants those seeds for being able to at least go for the next hour. And like you're talking about, Kevin, sometimes there's a couple of hours during the day where it is dragging difficult. And then all of a sudden you have a shift because of the seed that you planted early in the morning, and you decided to eat and make sure that you hydrated and do some of those basics. But I think sometimes it's okay to be honest that, yeah, today sucks a lot, but that's okay. It's not every day that's been like this, and hopefully it won't be every day that's like this.
I love what you're saying. Man, we could talk and talk and talk. We have so much to continue on. We might need to have you back on again.
Sure.
But
See, at the beginning, you shouldn't have told me that I was simple and non-verbose.
Oh, this is not verbose. This is valuable. This
That's
is
right.
I mean, everything we've spoken to. Oh, you give me a minute there, Ballister. I'm so grateful that you've given us your time today.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I'm going to be going back through this and picking up more gems. There's so much to learn from this.
Yeah, there's so much. Yeah.
I'm grateful for the chance to have the conversation with both of you. I know that both of you have had such incredible journeys individually, and it's inspiring to see how you're impacting your community and the folks that are listening to your podcast. It encourages me as well as I'm sure the folks that are listening.
It's so wonderful to come across on our adventures the humility displayed by the patient doctors, and we sure hope there are more of you. It's truly an inspiration. It's a gift. Your work, your service is a gift to us, and thank you for choosing to stay on Earth with us and serve. I just really think that as even the benefits of technology, building bridges, extending across oceans and lands far away, as well as just the next county line. I think we really can create optimal function for many people's lives by speaking these stories and letting people know what resources are available and celebrating where we are today, right now.
Thanks again for the opportunity, and if anybody wants to reach out to me, obviously I'm available and I'm happy to assist.
Yeah, let's talk about that. Where can people find you?
Yeah, the easiest way is thriveneuro.com. So that's THRIVENEURO.com, Thrive Neuro. It's a very simple, like Michelle mentioned, it does not have a phone number or an address on there because I'm by appointment only. So that I can focus on those folks that I see. But there is a contact page there where somebody can reach out and send me a message, and we'll get back to them. But I'm in the Atlanta, Georgia area. I'm probably found at one of seven different coffee shops on a daily basis, because medication and alcohol doesn't affect me, but neither does espresso. So I enjoy copious amounts.
I'm a bit envious at that.
Yeah, so I can have 4 shots of espresso before I go to sleep while I'm laying in bed, and it will make a bit of difference. It's actually kind of disappointing when you're studying for finals. But yeah, no, I'm available, and I'd love to. And also for the folks that are listening, if they're ever in the Atlanta area, as you can probably tell by the lack of formality, and I love getting together and meeting with folks and having conversations over coffee about their journey. It doesn't just have to be in the clinical setting, where obviously is where we do the work, but we do the life outside of the clinic as well.
Oh, wow. I am so glad I met you, Jerome. Thank you for just being a beautiful human being, and thank you for hopping on the podcast. Let's say we will be in touch. And
I'm looking forward to it, man.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Calvin. Thanks so much, Michelle.
Pleasure. Take care.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Bye.
Well, that's it, guys. Thanks for joining us on the Adventures in Brain Injury podcast. You can find all of the other podcasts on adventuresinbraininjury.com or feedabrain.com or on Google Play, Stitcher, or iTunes, or anywhere else where podcasts are found. If you enjoyed this episode, consider helping us out on Patreon. I want to thank all of our supporters over there. We got a few more recently, and it means the world to me. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next time. Adios. Someone take me to a doctor, just take away this curse. Someone take me to a doctor.